Okay, hello. In previous presentations, I've said that the felon does not have the character to be in the White House and that he wants to be a dictator to do whatever, whenever he wants to do it. He talks like Democrats dislike him because he's a Republican. But it's not because he's a Republican, it's because of him trying to get away with performing illegal acts. And because of that, many Republicans have dropped their support of him. He has demonstrated that he wants to be a dictator by firing senior military officers that will not do everything he wants. He has fired several generals and admirals, plus all senior JAG officers, Judge Advocate General officers, in an attempt to remove or reduce oversight on his actions. Now, in this video, former President Obama provides examples about the felon behaving like a madman and proving that he in fact does not have the character or the temperament to be in the White House. Please watch the rest of this video.
We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America, and we're willing to die to protect it. Every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Guardian, and Coast Guardsman, each of us commits our very life to protect and defend that document, regardless of personal price.
Now, when he said wannabe dictator, he was referring to the felon. Here's the rest of the video.
Okay, so Trump's New Year's meltdown was really bad, and Barack Obama broke down how this was the worst thing he has ever seen.
While Americans were preparing to welcome the new year with hope and optimism, the President of the United States spent New Year's Eve telling people to rot in hell. Not metaphorically, not in some veiled political language, literally writing on social media that a Republican district attorney and a Democratic governor should rot in hell. And if that were the only disturbing thing that happened yesterday, we might write it off as one more troubling outburst from a deeply troubled man. But what happened on December 31st, 2025 was far more revealing than a simple tantrum. It was the sound of someone admitting defeat while pretending to claim victory. Let me start with the most important development, the one being buried under all the noise and vitriol. The president announced he is withdrawing the National Guard from Chicago, Los Angeles, and Portland. He framed this as his decision, his choice, his strategic brilliance. But make no mistake about what actually happened. The Supreme Court rejected his attempt to deploy troops in Chicago. And Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ordered California National Guard members returned to state control. Federal judges in multiple jurisdictions ruled his federalization of state troops illegal and unconstitutional. He lost in court repeatedly, decisively, completely. Governor Gavin Newsom stated it plainly. The president has finally admitted defeat. The federalization of the National Guard in California was illegal. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker was even more direct. Donald Trump is lying again. He lost in court when Illinois stood up against his attempt to militarize American cities with the National Guard. Now Trump is forced to stand down. These are not Democratic talking points. This is what the courts rule. This is what the Constitution requires. But here is where it gets truly disturbing. The president cannot simply acknowledge that he overstepped his authority. Instead, he posted on social media claiming that crime had been greatly reduced by their presence, except the Guard troops in Chicago never actually patrolled the streets. They were blocked by court order and did training exercises instead. So when the president claims they greatly reduced crime in Chicago, he is literally crediting invisible soldiers with fighting crime they never encountered. He went further. He wrote that Portland, Los Angeles, and Chicago were gone if it were not for the federal government stepping in. Gone as if three major American cities were on the verge of collapse, and only his intervention saved them. This is not political spin, this is delusion. And when reality contradicts his delusion, when courts tell him he cannot do what he wants to do, his response is not reflection or restraint. His response is rage. That rage exploded across social media yesterday in ways that should alarm every American, regardless of party. He told Colorado Governor Jared Polis and Mesa County District Attorney Dan Rubenstein that he wishes them only the worst and hopes they rot in hell. His reason for this vitriol is that they prosecuted Tina Peters, a county clerk, who allowed unauthorized access to election systems in an attempt to overturn the 2020 election. She is 70 years old, not 73, as the president incorrectly stated. She is serving 9 years in prison because she broke the law, and the president, who took an oath to uphold the law, spent New Year's Eve wishing damnation on the people who enforced it. Then he turned his attention to George Clooney. The actor and his wife Amal were granted French citizenship, a personal decision about where they want to raise their family. The president's response was to write that they are two of the worst political prognosticators of all time, that France is in the midst of a major crime problem, and that Clooney was never a movie star at all, just an average guy who made very few and totally mediocre movies. I think about what it says about a president that he spent New Year's Eve crafting insults about an actor's filmography. But the attacks did not stop there. He posted that the Democrats are a bunch of cheaters and thieves that never want to do what is good for America on New Year's Eve. While families were gathering to celebrate, the president was calling half the country cheaters and thieves. He attacked Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, deliberately misspelling his name as Waltz. He made completely unsubstantiated claims that 90% of fraud in Minnesota was caused by people who came into the country illegally from Somalia. 90%, with no evidence, no investigation, no facts, just raw xenophobia dressed up as policy concern, and even repeated the long debunked lie that Representative Ilhan Omar married her brother. This falsehood has been investigated and disproven so many times that continuing to spread it is not politics, it is harassment. But the president does not care about truth. He cares about targets. And on New Year's Eve, he needed targets for his rage because the courts had just handed him a humiliating defeat. Let me be very clear about what that defeat means. The Supreme Court, with a 6-3 conservative majority, rejected his claim that he could federalize the National Guard to enforce immigration policy in Chicago. The court ruled that at this preliminary stage, the government has failed to identify a source of authority that would allow the military to execute the laws in Illinois. Read that again. The conservative Supreme Court told this president that he does not have the authority to do what he tried to do. And his response to that constitutional rebuke was to spend New Year's Eve telling people to rot in hell, attacking actors, spreading lies about immigrants, and pretending that his forced retreat was actually a strategic withdrawal. He wrote that the troops will come back, perhaps in a much different and stronger form, when crime begins to soar again. This is not a president who has learned anything. This is a president who is already planning his next unconstitutional overreach while lying about the one he just had to abandon. Now, let me connect this to something broader, because yesterday's meltdown is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern. When this president faces accountability, when courts tell him no, When reality contradicts his narrative, he does not adjust. He attacks, he lies, he rages, and he pretends that defeat is victory. We saw it with his response to the Epstein files, where he is covering up instead of releasing. We saw it with his Venezuela adventure, where he revealed a CIA operation for applause. We saw it with his economic policies, where prices are rising and stores are closing, but he claims tremendous success. And now we see it with the National Guard, where multiple courts ruled against him, but he frames withdrawal as his generous decision. The man who spent New Year's Eve telling people to rot in hell is the same man who has access to the nuclear codes. The man who crafted insults about George Clooney's movies, the same man who is supposed to conduct diplomacy with foreign leaders. The man who spread lies about Somali immigrants is the same man who swore an oath to faithfully execute the office of president. And the man who cannot accept a court ruling without having a public breakdown is the same man who will face many more legal constraints in the year ahead. Because here is what 2026 will bring: more court cases, more legal defeats, more moments where judges tell him that he cannot do what he wants to do. Yesterday's performance suggests that every time this president loses, every time reality intrudes on his fantasy, we will see more rage, more lies, more attacks on anyone who holds him accountable. I spent 8 years in the Oval Office navigating complex challenges. I know what it feels like when courts rule against you. And I can tell you that the appropriate response is not to tell people to rot in hell. The appropriate response is to respect the separation of powers, to acknowledge that courts exist to check executive overreach, to accept that the Constitution matters more than any president's wishes. What we witnessed yesterday was the opposite of that. We saw a president so consumed by his own ego that he cannot distinguish between personal attacks and policy disagreements. We saw a president so detached from reality that he claims credit for crime reduction achieved by National Guard troops who never actually deployed. We saw a president so desperate to avoid acknowledging defeat that he frames court-ordered withdrawals as strategic decisions. And we saw a president so lacking in basic human decency that he spent New Year's Eve, a time when most leaders offer messages of hope and unity, spreading hatred and division. Instead, this is not normal. This is not acceptable. And the fact that it continues, that it gets worse, that each defeat produces more rage rather than more reflection, should terrify every American who cares about democratic norms and constitutional governance. The court stopped him this time. Multiple judges told him no, but he learned nothing except that he needs to come back in a much different and stronger form. That is not the language of someone who respects constraints. That is the language of someone planning revenge. And as we enter 2026, as this president faces more legal defeats and more political setbacks, we should all be asking ourselves what happens when the courts tell him no next time based on yesterday's performance. I think we all know the answer.
He should be in the nut house or the jail or jailhouse. The sooner the better. Okay, thank you for watching. There have been other instances of the felon behaving like a thug and not the President of the United States. He continues to validate that he should not be in the White House. It's like his parents never said no to him, and he just can't get used to the real world. Regardless of your political party, objectively thinking, this behavior should never be displayed by anyone that is supposed to be representing our country. He just doesn't know how to play by the rules. He doesn't know how to respect the rule of law in our country. He's supposed to be leading the country, not breaking the laws of the country. Again, thank you for watching. Oh, one important note. In the comments section, there's a link to a video that demonstrates how you can find technology that cures early stage prostate cancer without surgery, hospital stay, or harmful side effects. That technology is the CyberKnife, and it cured me in 2007 as I stopped by for treatments on my way to work over a 5-day period. That was in 2007. And by following the steps that I demonstrate in that video, you can find a facility or hospital closest to you, no matter where you are in the country. Again, thank you for watching.